If you look at this number, what you see is that there's a big seasonal variation in the solar production, but also you can produce quite a lot of energy. For example, you can produce 8 kilowatt hours using just a 10 kilowatt solar system in the Netherlands. While, for example, if you look at wind production, it has like an inverted U shape, right? So you have like an inverted U shape here, and for wind production, you have a U shape in the generation. So what this shows is that you have daily variation. There are days in summer where you can produce less energy than a day in winter, for example, but also the seasonal variation. So what this means is that if we move to the future where we go from 0 to all the way up to 100% renewable energy production, you would need more and more energy storage in the network, right? So you have energy storage on the hourly level, on a day level, and on a seasonal level. And all of us have a choice. The choice is we can always over-install renewables and curtail this energy and say, I don't want as much storage. So this graph kind of moves towards the left. Or you can say, I really don't want to waste renewables. I will build enough transmission capacity to transport this energy. And then you will need more and more energy storage into the future. So what we know is that renewables will need storage. But another thing we also need to know is a question which I often get asked, is solar better or wind better? So to answer this question, we ran some research here in TU Delft. Where we did is we modeled a system in the Netherlands where we had 100% wind or 100% solar, and we tried to see how much energy storage do we need in the network. And what you see is that as the percentage of renewables increases the network from 40% renewable energy fraction to 100% renewable energy fraction. And if you have a purely wind or a purely solar system, you need large amounts of energy storage because of this daily and seasonal variation. On the other hand, if you make a perfect match, if you mix solar and wind because of this U behavior, inverted U behavior, what you notice is there's always an optimal point in which the amount of energy storage needed is little. So we should not be asking, is wind better or solar better? The answer is both are good. And we always have to look for your location, geography, latitude, longitude. What's this optimal mix that we can bring this energy storage lower and lower and possibly even hit a limit of 0, right? A related question is, what is the best energy storage technology? So if you look at such a plot, which shows the energy duration for different energy storage, you look at thermal energy storage, electrochemical energy storage, supercapacitors, so kind of power capacity, you often see this graph which has different kinds of energy storage technologies. And a common question asked is, what's the best energy storage technology? I believe this is not a good question in the first place. The reason for that is we need energy storage for different kinds of requirements. So rather we should be asking, what's the best energy storage technology for the given use case? So if you look at this graph between the energy storage power requirement and the time requirement, and you see for stability reasons, flexibility reasons, and adequacy reasons, you need different types of energy storage. And this is then matched by different energy storage technology. So in the future, we will need not just batteries, for example, we will also need pumped hydro storage. We will also need thermal energy storage. We also need supercapacitors and flywheels. So the question to be asked is, for each of these storage requirements in the future, what energy storage fits the best? Before I move to the focus of my talk, I want to make one final remark. There seems to be a lot of focus on electrical energy storage, but that's only part of the story. If you look at the final energy demand in the Netherlands, about 40% of the energy requirement is actually heat, and which is actually much larger than the 16%, which is the final energy demand in terms of electricity. So heat is a very important energy usage. It can be for heating the building, can be for different kind of chemical processes. So we should be asking ourselves, not just electrical energy storage, but also how much thermal energy storage that we need into the future. And we also have to remember that when you store electricity or energy in terms of heat, it may not always be bidirectional. So in other words, if you take electricity and put it in as heat, using a resistive coil or a heat pump, not all technology can actually make heat back to electricity. So it could only be unidirectional in certain applications. And we can always combine that with, with a buffer tank or with dedicated heat storage. We work in one of our projects with a partner where they do is they basically store heat in water. And water is quite cheap. So it's one of the cheaper ways of energy storage. And in Netherlands, for example, if you look at a home, 80% of the energy used over the whole year is actually heat. And there's a very small contribution for electricity. So we should never forget heat storage moving forward. The focus of my talk is about how can we use electric vehicle batteries as a means of energy storage. And just to give you some numbers, an electric vehicle battery can be anywhere between 50 to 100 kilowatt hours. So it's a lot of energy which is sitting in the EV battery. And for 95% of the time, most cars are simply parked and sitting. So it gives you a very interesting way of energy storage moving into the future. And we also know that cars are distributed everywhere. We have thousands and thousands of vehicles, so which means we have a huge capacity of energy storage if we use electric vehicles as a means of energy storage. We have a number of projects here in TU Delft where we look at how we can use electric vehicles, how we can do smart charging and this technology of vehicle to grid, where we use a vehicle's energy and send it back to the grid. We have a number of benefits, such as using vehicle to grid technology for energy price trading, for charging it from renewables, for using it for congestion management in the network, or for doing voltage regulation or frequency regulation. In view of time of this talk, I'm not going to all of these applications, but I will focus on one of them, which is basically combining renewables and energy storage and electric mobility. Before we dive into it, it's important to recognize that every EV basically has a battery, and there are two types of charging. So there's something called DC charging, where we directly plug an EV charger directly to the battery. Usually these chargers are outside the vehicle, so we call it off-board DC chargers. Or you have vehicles which have a charger on board, and this charger can then be used to what we call as AC charging. So typically DC charging is more expensive because the power electronics is outside. AC charging is typically cheaper because it already uses a charger which is on the vehicle. What you have to recognize today is most of these chargers inside the vehicle are actually one way. In other words, you can only charge the vehicle, we cannot discharge the vehicle back. So what is important to use electric vehicles as a means of storage in the future is to have onboard power electronic converters, which are actually bidirectional. By doing so, we can, for free, use the electric vehicle battery as a means of energy storage. This is indeed possible in the future if you use ISO 15118 communication. For example, in the Netherlands, in the city of Utrecht, the world's first bidirectional AC charging system is already being deployed. We have a limited set of vehicles from Renault, and in the future with Hyundai, which basically uses bidirectional onboard charger to do it. In most other parts of the world, they use bidirectional off-board chargers to basically do this type of energy storage. So if you look at charging electric vehicles from solar energy, there are several benefits to it. Of course, the obvious thing is zero net emissions. Both solar panels and electric vehicle battery are DC, so we can combine everything on DC. The electric vehicle can be used as a storage for PV, and there's a big benefit from proximity. So we can put solar panels on buildings. The cars are also packed, so we can basically merge both of them. And if I drive to work with an electric car, I can just park the EV, and while I'm working, it can spend the whole day charging from solar. So a lot of benefits of combining solar and electric vehicles in terms of a means of energy storage. So if you look at the way we do solar charging of EVs and energy storage today, you would basically take energy from a solar panel, use a solar inverter, and take this energy to the grid, and basically bring the energy back from the grid into the EV. One of the problems with this method is that the solar panels and the EV battery are both DC. So we are moving the energy from DC to AC and then back, right? And to do this, we need two inverters, and also the power conversion from DC to AC creates losses. So what we developed in TU Delft was technology where we integrate everything in DC. So we created one single integrated DC charger. And what we do in this DC charger is we directly get energy from the solar panels and we send it to the EV directly on DC. So there's no power conversion to AC. So it's much more efficient. And we just use a single inverter instead of two that we saw in the previous picture for both the solar panels and the electrical. So it's much more compact and much more cheaper power electronic converter. And by also making this inverter and DC-DC converter bidirectional, we can basically use the car as an energy storage for the solar, right? So this basically means you don't have to make any extra investments for storage. You just use your existing EV as a means of energy storage. So the benefits of this kind of integration is that since we just need one inverter and we used wide bandgap semiconductor devices, you can see the size of the new solution is much more compact. And also it's much more efficient because it works at this without this AC power internet. So you can see the solid lines here. The efficient system is much better than the conventional system based on IGBT technologies and based on AC power exchange. And the system is also designed to be compatible with the CHAdeMO and the CCS global charging standards. So it's not just an academic work, but it's also now a commercial solution that people can buy and install all around the world. This idea, we're now extending it to also add an extra energy storage. The reason for that is since the EV is not always available at the charging spot, we now want to combine solar energy. We want to combine electric vehicles and an extra battery storage and integrate. So that's part of the PhD project of William. We're also looking at in another PhD project to basically install all of these power electronics underground. So if you have a home, behind the home, because all these electronics are quite big and they occupy space in the built environment, and looking at how can we integrate electronics and put them underground, how can we use the soil to cool them. And we're also looking at another research where we're now trying to see how we can operate such a solar battery EV charging system, but how can we operate it standalone? So which means in parts of the world where there is no electricity grid or not so reliable electricity grid, how can we use the electric vehicle and an extra battery as a means of energy storage to actually facilitate energy access in those locations? So I hereby come to the last part of the talk. I spoke to you about all the nice things about vehicle-to-grid technology, using an EV as a means of energy storage. But, you know, all good things always have the other side. So what are the main challenges for vehicle-to-grid technology? The first obvious challenge is that you need bidirectional power electronics. So I gave you the example of most EVs today actually don't have such a bidirectional charge. So we cannot really do vehicle-to-grid today because of this. There's also a big question, what if you keep using this battery and do several cycles on it? What happens to the lifetime of this battery? So part of our research is now dedicated to do this. And also another challenge is currently there are not much of economic incentives for people to basically participate in this kind of energy storage. And so in the future, we need to have new kind of regulations to basically facilitate these kinds of incentives for end users to participate. Another challenge is, you know, we have, as I said, it's nice that there are thousands or millions of EVs in the future to do vehicle-to-grid, but how do you actually bring all of that together, coordinate and aggregate and actually use little batteries in different locations in a kind of a coordinated way? So this was a big challenge, an ICT challenge to aggregate and coordinate. And there is still open questions about privacy and security with vehicle-to-grid and about standardization. So I hope that in the coming years, we are able to handle all of these issues. If you're more interested about electric vehicles, TU Delft has a massive open online course on electric cars. It's called Electric Cars Introduction, Technology, Business and Policy. It's a free course, only if you can go to EDX and follow it. Till date, we have had 200,000 learners from around the world who have followed this course. So if you also would like to have more lectures and want to understand more about electric mobility, about batteries, about chargers, about the policy initiatives, then I do recommend following our massive open online course and join our set of international learners there. Thank you. And if you have more questions in the later on sessions, I will take it up. Okay. Maybe I stop sharing at this moment.
Thank you, Prof. Gautham, for the interesting presentation. So next up, we have Prof. Palani from National University of Singapore. Prof. Palani, please.
All right. Good afternoon. Can you see my slide?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks to the organizers from NTU and TU Delft as well as IIT Mumbai for inviting me. That's the topic I have given. Can we develop safe battery technologies? I would like to spend some time on the safety aspects of the battery technologies. Let's move on. The content of the presentation is here. Safety of lithium-ion batteries. We are going to compare the heat generation and internal resistance of lithium-ion batteries using various chemistries. It could be oxide chemistry or it could be polyanion chemistry. Normally, it is seen that the polyanion-based chemistry has more safety features compared to oxides. Let's see if we can understand that. And then I will also introduce fast charging capability using lithium titanate batteries and address the issues as on today, and then talk briefly about the sodium-ion battery technology and make some conclusions. So let's start with the safety of lithium-ion batteries. I'm going to stick to 18650 format, as you can see here. That format is commonly used in industry. 18650 means 18 millimeter diameter and a 65 millimeter height, 1865. The 0 is added. And then 4 different chemistries, as you can see here. This is NCA, nickel, cobalt, aluminum oxide versus graphite. Energy density is given. This is an oxide chemistry. There's nickel-rich chemistry, nickel-rich NMC, 60, 20, 20. Again, oxide chemistry. Cobalt-rich NMC, 20, 20, 60 versus graphite. The last one is a polyanion lithium ion phosphate versus graphite. Lithium ion LFP technology in short has a relatively lower energy density, but you will see that it has much better thermal stability as well as safety features. Okay, so having introduced, I ask a question, is lithium ion battery or lithium ion battery technology safe? Why I ask this question? Because we see several incidences. For example, in Singapore, it is known that the personal mobility device is a two-wheel with a wooden pad or metal pad, and then someone standing and then holding the handle here. And then that exploded pretty often. And right now, government has banned using PMD in public and all. Very few people only are on board. And then the e-scooter is one example where India has been experiencing this issue. And this is an example in Australia where mega pack like 450 megawatt hour, one of the packs got exploded, and then there are incidences like while charging in China as well as in Stuttgart, the row of buses got ablazed, and there were issues. So naturally, this is the common question: are lithium-ion batteries safe? I would like to say that as long as we operate the lithium-ion batteries using standard operating conditions, they are safe. That should not be any ambiguity at all, doubt at all. But occasionally, these batteries may go through certain level of abuse. It could be thermal abuse or electrical abuse or mechanical abuse, knowingly or unknowingly. That might cause so-called micro inner short, leading to self-heating, local heating. And if we ignore this abusement over a long period of time, this leads to subsequent effects. For example, SEI on the anode side, which is the graphite in most of the examples I've shown. SEI on the anode side, solid electrolyte interface, which is the graphite and electrolyte reaction, and then there is a soft polymer layer that get decomposed, and again heat start accumulating. You can see the temperature rises as you keep waiting for longer and longer time. And then the next one is the separator between the positive electrode and negative electrode. The separator is usually polymer separator, so that melts because of the inner short circuiting, and the temperature rises. If we continue to stay with these abusement, then graphite get oxidized and the electrolyte get oxidized and cathode decompose, and leading to so-called thermal runaway. And there is a limiting temperature. Actually, I have acknowledged this particular reference. I like this particular slide also. There is a limiting temperature beyond which you should not stay. Actually, you should escape from that zone. It's called TE. So temperature of escape, where you have to escape. You shouldn't stay because you can't control the thermal runaway at all. Now, having said, let me take 1 or 2 examples and then give you some feeling of what is going to happen. So I considered 4 chemistries, and I'm going to now charge and discharge at different C rate. Let me define C rate for those who are not familiar. 1C means charging means 60 minutes I'm taking to charge the battery. And 1C discharging means 60 minutes I'm taking to discharge the battery. So you can see here among the 4 at very low C rate, 2-hour charging, 2-hour discharging, LFP does not even release any heat at all. These are actually normalized, joule per ampere hour, normalized for different chemistries. So it doesn't even release any heat. So very, very safe. And if you go to very high C rate, for example, 5C charging, 5C discharging, that means in about 12 minutes charging, 12 minutes discharging. Again, you see that only LFP technology releases less heat. Next one is the NCA technology, green one, NCA technology. The third one is the nickel-rich NMC, and the last one is the cobalt-rich NMC. So cobalt-rich NMC, which is the 20-20-60, that releases so much of heat, and people normally ignore that. They don't use the technology. There is, of course, another reason why people avoid cobalt-rich because of the supply chain and various ethical issues and all. So you can clearly see that the LFP technology releases less heat. Now, please take note what the message here. The total heat generation, whatever you measured, is because of two reasons. One is reversible heat because of the entropy changes when you remove lithium and then when you put back lithium. This is chemistry specific. We have absolutely no hold on that. But there is so-called irreversible heat loss due to the internal resistance. That internal resistance could be because of the electrolyte, contact resistance, or what is happening on the positive electrode, what is happening on the negative electrode. So I'm going into the details of the irreversible heat loss, which we can have some control. As I said, reversible heat loss is something which is chemistry specific. We have absolutely no control on that. Now let's look at the internal resistances. So you can see here, this is the positive electrode, this is a negative electrode, and this is separator. Because this is in the discharge state, I refer to this as a cathode and anode. Now, when you do this, what happened? You could have internal resistance because of the electrolyte and the contact. So you have the contact here, you can see. Or you can have something due to the cathode, what is happening in the cathode. It could be the charge transfer. We are basically transferring the electron, we are transferring the lithium ion, put together lithium ion and the electron, I call charge transfer. That could give rise to internal resistance. Or this positive electrode in contact with the electrolyte, we call it as cathode electrolyte resistance, or the lithium ion and the electron, we call it as chemical lithium diffusion within the positive electrode. That's the last one. These three can give rise to so-called internal resistance. Or what is happening on the anode, that is, again, you have charge transfer resistance. Lithium ion is extracted and the electrons are extracted. Both of them have to be extracted efficiently. If there is any resistance, that would give rise to internal resistance. Or the SEI I mentioned to you, the graphite in contact with the electrolyte, giving rise to a polymer layer, a thin polymer layer, that can give rise to. The last one is the lithium, can I say chemical lithium, that is a lithium ion and the electron diffusion within the graphite. Now, let me go to the impedance analysis at the cell level and then look at various contributions. Conventionally, what people do is they take this cell and then vary the frequency from low frequency to high frequency as shown here. And then there is an intercept here with the x-axis. And then they attribute this to so-called equivalent circuit model and then talk about different contribution from the cathode, anode, etc., etc. But as per our experience over the last 16 years at NUES, we found that there is certain level of ambiguity in assigning these contributions to the different contributions which I shown in the last slide. So what people do in recent time is to do so-called distributed relaxation time. That means they Fourier transform this data and then present this distribution function as a function of the frequency or time. And then you see clearly different contributions. And then we can do additional experiment and attribute these different contributions to different components, which I discussed in my previous slide. So that's what I'm going to show in my next slide. You can see here. Let's just ignore at the moment cobalt rich. We have no time. So I'm talking about LFP technology and nickel rich NMC and then NCA technology. One can clearly see that there are 4 contributions. 1 at very low frequency, 2 middle frequency, 3rd, and the 4th. By doing various experiments, which you can see in our paper, published paper, Manigandan's paper, one can clearly see the major contribution is because of the charge transfer happening on the positive electrode, which is the cathode. So you can see here, this is the major contribution. And interestingly, the same contribution is seen in also oxide chemistry. All these are basically charge transfer reaction at the cathode side. The next one is the lithium diffusion within LFP. You can see here, this is the next contribution. This is the SEI, this is the contact and electrolyte. So you can see here the big bottleneck for the internal resistance. In other words, the heat generation is due to the charge transfer that is happening in the cathode or positive electrode. And interestingly, if you look at the values for the LFP chemistry, you see that it is lower as compared to oxide chemistries. That explains why the LFP has the lowest heat generation. So I'm just ignoring at the moment reversible heat. But if I just take into account only reversible heat loss, you can see that this is closely related with the internal resistance. Okay. Now, the second abusement can be quick charging. If I do a quick charging of a particular chemistry, for example, lithium cobalt oxide versus graphite, I can see that while charging, what is happening is we are removing the lithium ion and electron, and cobalt get oxidized. CO2 plus becomes CO3 plus. Whereas here, say 3 plus becomes 4 plus, sorry. So whereas here, the carbon, lithium is intercalated and there is a reduction reaction. So this reduction reaction happens at 0.2 volt versus lithium, which is 0. This dotted line is the 0. It is happening at the closer potential to the lithium metal deposition, lithium metal formation. So if you do fast charging because of the polarization and internal resistance we discussed previously, this 0.2 volt can approach to 0 volt. leading to so-called dendrite lithium deposition on the graphite, which causes shortage, internal micro shortage. So one should not do fast charging. So now that's a form of electrical abuse. Now the question is there a way to come out of this? Yes, lithium titanate is a technology for fast charging and fast discharging. It's a safe technology, well-established technology. So you can see here, the lithium titanate insertion potential is far above 0 volt. So you can insert quickly, extract quickly. Whereas the graphite is a red color danger zone, you have to insert slowly, but extraction can be quickly. And interestingly, this technology is well known. Lithium titanate is a zero strain and a long cycle life. It is extremely safe, etc., etc. I'm skipping some of this slide, but I want to emphasize that in the marine industry, which goes through quite a lot of vibrations, which I actually, mechanical abuse is something which I skipped because there is not much time. So mechanical abuse in the marine is well known. You can see here almost all the applications use more or less lithium titanate technology, as you can see here. This is a nice report. So that explains that lithium titanate is a robust technology and it can address the mechanical abuse from the safety point of view. But unfortunately, as you can see, it's too expensive, $500 to $600 per kilowatt hour. If you are comparing LFP versus graphite, it is somewhere in the range $125 to $150 per kilowatt hour. So the question is there any other safe technology which is cheaper? That's where I'm introducing sodium-ion battery technology. So you can see here, supply chain is not an issue. The cost can be as low as $100 to $200, and it can be quickly discharged. I will show you some data shortly. So in our group, we have introduced so-called non-flammable electrolyte. This is glyme-based electrolyte, as you can see. If I am bringing a flame to the electrolyte, it doesn't catch fire up to 60 seconds. Whereas people have been using conventionally carbonate-based electrolyte. Let us ignore this. Carbonate-based electrolytes, as per our experience, catches fire in 10 seconds. So we call this as flammable electrolyte. This is non-flammable electrolyte. Also, if you look at the thermal stability of this green one, you can see it is stable as high as 250 to 273 degrees centigrade, whereas the red one is less thermal stable. All right, let's now straight away go to one or two examples. I'm left with about 2 minutes. 15 minutes is the time given, by the way. So let's go to the specific examples. I'm going to talk about sodium iridium phosphate as a positive electrode material. This is basically literature is there, and then one can go into the details. And we have so-called a kilo scale lab. We normally scale up the production from 200 gram to about 3 or 4 kilogram per batch. And you can see the performance is pretty good. For every batch, we test the performance, and the impurity levels are within the acceptable level that doesn't affect the storage performance, as you can see here. And we do have a prototype line, 1% and 20% dry room, where we can produce some of these commercial type cells. So I'm showing you here sodium iridium phosphate pristine versus hard carbon as the negative electrode. This is modified sodium iridium phosphate. We dope 10% zinc in the place of vanadium, modified sodium iridium phosphate versus hard carbon. With the modification, one can see here the capacity goes up, the energy density goes up. Kilogram refers to the complete weight of the cell. And you can see with the zinc doping, the discharge rate can be as high as about 4 to 5 C. And we have shown pretty decent data, about 1,000 cycles retaining about 77% capacity with a 90% depth of discharge. Now, interestingly, what is happening with the zinc doping, as you can see here, it is the charge transfer which is reduced half its value. As a result, it also improves the chemical diffusion of the lithium within MVP. I'm not able to go into the detail because I'm almost about to finish my time. So I would like to emphasize that charge transfer, if you can control somehow, you can minimize the heat generation, as you can see from the next slide. You can see here, this is the modified NVP versus graphite, whereas this is pristine NVP versus graphite. The heat generation is much lower as compared to pristine NVP versus graphite. This is the cobalt-rich NMC versus graphite lithium. This is nickel-rich NMC versus graphite lithium. So we are able to show that this is more or less comparable. Heat generation is more or less comparable. So in my conclusion, heat generation and commercial type cells have been discussed. I related it with the internal resistance, largely caused by the charge transfer reaction at the positive electrode. Polyanion shows better safety features than the oxide chemistry. Lithium titanate is very good for fast charging, fast discharging, but it's pretty expensive. Sodium-ion battery technology can be an alternative, inexpensive, and safe technology. So minimizing the charge transfer resistance, as an example I showed, is basically can help minimizing the heat generation, one possible means of improving safety. Having said, the take-home message here is it is extremely challenging to achieve long range and fast charging. If you want long range, you need to use graphite. If you are interested in the fast charging, you need to use some other technology. But even more challenging to achieve high power, particularly in all solid-state batteries, if you have closely followed my talk, the charge transfer reaction, the interface between the cathode and the electrolyte is extremely important. This is the major challenge in the all solid-state batteries, but problems can be solved. It's not impossible. So I would like to thank many of the funding agencies and part of the group members who have contributed to what I have presented just now. And thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Palani, for your presentation. So,
thank you, Jackie.
So, we will be having the Q&A session currently. So we will currently be having the Q&A session. So if any of you have any questions, you all can type your questions into the chat box. Or if you all are not shy, you guys can actually unmute yourself and also ask your questions directly to the professors. So any questions from the floor?
Hello everyone. I had one question. So, like when there is an explosion, so how can we identify that there is a chance of an explosion in a lithium-ion battery? What will be the parameters to identify that?
Do you want me to address this question, Jakshi?
Any of the prof can actually answer these questions.
Gautham, you want to go?
I think it's more closer to your area, so maybe you are better.
So thanks for this question. Naturally, this is an interesting question. I can also say that it's $1 million question. And I can say that one has to closely follow the so-called state of health. So when you receive the battery, it's at 100% SOH, state of health. But when you use, as I told you, that there is a possibility for the cell or battery pack to expose different levels of abuse. It could be electrical, or it could be thermal, or it could be mechanical, or other form of abuse which I may not have even imagined. So what is more important is your BMS. I think that's where the Gautham's contribution will be very important. BMS has to be highly robust to tell you that the battery is going through some unwanted experiences, and you have to be cautious on that.
One small addition to the point, sir. Like when we are charging lithium batteries, because we use in drones and other technologies. So in our college, so we have to charge them in some surface, not like we are putting on a table and charging them. So is this one of the factors to identify that, or just the BMS is only the one factor?
Actually, your question is still not clear. Can you please clarify? Can you repeat your question?
Yes, sir. So, sir, I just wanted to ask the parameters, like to become cautious that there may be an explosion. So, which parameters we have to be aware so that we can predict that explosion? Maybe in next 5 minutes, suppose in the next 5 minutes there is an explosion of a lithium-ion battery. So, which parameters we have to monitor? Like, which parameters you have to monitor?
I will put it like this. Imagine your battery is 100% SOH. That is the fresh battery. You don't have to worry about it. As I told you during my talk, as long as you follow the standard operating procedure, you are going to charge it as per the vendor suggestion. For example, company A is advising you charge it by C/2. You stick to that. C/2 means 2-hour charging, and then discharge it during your drive train, right? But when there is a suggestion that you do at C/2, Don't use a high ampere charger and then push it to half an hour or 45 minutes or 1 hour. That means you are not following the SOP, standard operating procedure, right? So that is one thing. And then this is something which you have control. Then I told you that the battery pack can go through certain level of abusement, knowingly or unknowingly. How do you monitor that? Periodic, periodic assessment of your battery pack. Say, for example, if I am going to use a PMD here in Singapore, I will not blindly use it from the day I purchase until, after 2-3 years, it is going to kind of, it becomes useless, right? So let's say 3 years of usage or 5 years of usage, the supplier predict. I'm not going to use that blindly for those 5 years. I'm going to periodically check, like me, am I good health? After 40 years, I'm supposed to have various kind of diseases. So what I do, I go regularly once in a year to the medical shop or a medical practitioner and then cross-check my health condition. So is my BP or is my sugar level, is different contribution, different components are there, different causes can be there for a human. It is almost the same. The battery pack has to be checked. I mean, its health has to be checked periodically. We cannot assume that I got it 100%. Immaterial of the experiences I go through, I will use it for 5 years. If it is a mobile phone, you can easily sense that it is getting heated up. But if it is a battery pack in an EV, electric vehicle, or in a PMD or in a scooter, you have hardly any chance to touch that, particularly during operation, to sense whether it is getting heated up or not. So the best way is take it to a workshop, electrical workshop. That's where people like Professor Gautham Ram and their expertise will help. So there is a workshop which is basically going to assess after, let us say, 3 months of usage. It is going to assess and tell, well, from 100%, your state of health has declined to 99.5%, 0.5% it degraded. That means your usage is in the proper condition. If instead of 99.5, in 3 months, if it degrades to 90%, that's the caution for you. That's the caution. So you have to think through how you are doing. What is your charging mode? What is your drive conditions? If you go through, that's why I showed one example. India I took because I partly know about the road conditions in India. So there are, of course, there is a lot of improvement now in the highways. But if you go to the interior part of the town and the villages, the road conditions are not that good. And second thing is people also use too many people drive the same vehicle, like 3 people sit at a time and then drive, which is a huge what to say.
And we tend to bridge the gap between academia and
Is it a question or somebody is talking there?
I think somebody's talking.
Okay. So the heavy usage, that means it is going to draw huge power, which also should be avoided. So you should, like human being, after 40 years, I'm going to take care of my health. In the same way, you should treat the battery pack also. You must, from the day you bought, periodically you have to check the health of the battery pack. And that answers your question. We can't go into finer detail because those are the real R&D, and we cannot discuss it in an open forum like this.
Yeah, got it, sir. Thanks a lot, sir. Thank you for your time. Thank you, sir.
So how do you responded by chat?
Sorry, Chanrik?
Hadi has responded by chat about IIT Bombay Club.
Yeah, Hadi is unable to speak now, so she has actually put in like the introduction of IIT Bombay into the chat box. Yeah. Thank you, Krishna, for your questions. Yeah. So we actually have another question here. So to both of the professors, what is the main difference between like lithium-ion batteries and like sodium-ion batteries in terms of like the performance and usability?
I think this question is probably much better for you, and I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Okay, sodium-ion chemistry, the electrochemistry is almost the same as lithium-ion battery. There is no difference. Okay, It is the positive electrode, negative electrode. In between, you have electrolyte, then there is a separator. These are the four components of at the cell level I'm talking. So in a lithium-ion battery, for example, LiFePO4 is the positive electrode that can supply lithium-ion. Graphite is the negative electrode, which can host lithium-ion. In between, you have electrolyte, LiPF6. Normally, people use EC, DEC, DMC, ethylene carbonate, diethylene carbonate, dimethylene carbonate. So those are the solvents. And then you have a separator, physical separator to avoid physical shorting, the contact. So physical separator, that is a polymer film, typically about 10 to 15 micron thickness. Same thing happens in the sodium-ion battery. In a sodium-ion battery, you have positive electrode which can supply sodium ion. It could be Na3V2PO4 thrice, or sodium manganese iron oxide, whatever it is. On the other side, instead of graphite, people commonly use a hard carbon, but graphite can also be used under certain special conditions, and then different anode materials can be imagined. In between, you have electrolyte which conducts sodium ion this time, like NaPF6, EC, DEC, DMC, sodium ion conductor. Then you have separator. So these are the sort of comparison of the component in both lithium-ion battery and sodium-ion battery chemistry. And the electrochemistry is exactly the same. Sodium ion and then electron move from the positive electrode to negative electrode when you charge. And then they are stored in hard carbon. So when you discharge, they revert back. Sodium ion moves through the electrolyte, electron moves through the external circuit and go back to the sodium vanadium phosphate. Very analogous. In terms of the energy density, lithium-ion battery as of now has relatively higher energy density as compared to sodium-ion battery. But please bear in mind, lithium-ion battery evolved over 20 to 30 years of research R&D. But sodium-ion battery, basically, it's somewhere about 8 to 10 years, last 8 to 10 years. People have sort of tried to move up and up. The data I have shown is relatively older data. 60 watt-hour per kg, the best data I have shown. So in our group, we have gone to 70 watt-hour per kg in 18650 format. I don't expect it to move beyond 100 watt-hour per kg for any positive electron or negative electron. Typically, we are expecting about 100, not more than that. If we can get comparable to LFP versus graphite, that's good enough for us for most of the applications. So energy density-wise, as on today, it is relatively lower as compared to lithium-ion battery. Cost-wise, people estimated to be about 20 to 30% cheaper than lithium-ion battery because the supply chain is very, very favorable. Sodium compound can be obtained from the seawater, and the electrolyte is relatively cheaper. And safety-wise, it is even better than lithium-ion battery. That I have shown you some data also. Because, of course, I must admit, because I have no time to talk, I showed you nickel-rich NMC as versus graphite, and then doped zinc-doped sodium vanadium phosphate versus hard carbon, same heat generation, almost the same level. But the NVP, modified NVP versus hard carbon can be discharged up to 5C, whereas nickel-rich NMC cannot be discharged at that 5C rate because it will generate so much of heat. So that's the difference. Safety benefit and then cost benefit, supply chain benefit, and there is a tremendous activity now. Lot of startups and then industries are now coming up.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Palani. Do Satak have any questions?
Yes. Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Hello, Professor. I am a master's student here at IIT Bombay. So I work on batteries. I have a question. Initially, we talked about charging and discharging of EV batteries using DC and AC voltage. So is there any correlation with the state of health if you employ long-term DC charging discharging compared to long-term AC charging discharging, as in which is better for the battery?
Yeah, maybe I can start with an answer for this. So if we typically look at DC charging, DC charging is synonymous with DC fast charging, right? So if you go back to the talk of Professor Palani, he was talking about C rates. So we are looking at fast charging, you're typically looking at C rates of anywhere between 1 to 3 C. So if you have a 50, 60 kilowatt hour battery pack and a big fast charging at 150 or even 350 kilowatts, the C rate is much higher. So if you look at from a state of health or lifetime perspective, those higher C rates are always usually more detrimental to the battery pack compared to AC charging, where AC charging, even though you can also do, you can also fast charge on AC, but then you need to have this onboard charger, which is very big. Typically, AC charging powers for cars, for example, are anywhere between 11 to 22 kilowatts, right? So if you put that in perspective, a 50 to 100 kilowatt hour battery, 11 to 22 kilowatt charging power, your C rates are extremely low. So again, from a state of health and aging of the cells, AC charging is always much better. So the idea is the longer you charge, the lower power you charge, better it is for the health of the battery on the long run. Another trend to be looked into is the fact that we are now looking at much higher voltage battery packs. Before we used to typically have 400 volt battery pack, and now we are looking at 800 volt battery packs. So this means the charging currents on the pack level are now coming down for the same charging power.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you, Prof. Gautham, for answering the question. So we have another question from Harita to Prof. Palani. How much is ambient temperature a point of concern for the standard operation of lithium-ion batteries? If it is the growing average temperatures, especially in tropical regions, a cause of concern for the safe usage of batteries?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. In fact, lithium-ion battery is designed to operate up to 50 or 55 degrees centigrade. So whatever the slight increase that you experience because of the climate change is not a serious concern. That is a straightforward answer. But if you go to low temperature, for example, below 5 degree or below 0 degree, sometimes the graphite cells does not function very satisfactorily. That is what you should during this question, I would like to clarify. If you go to too low temperature, that's the question, because the lithium diffusion in the both positive electrode as well as negative electrode becomes sluggish. So you generate a lot of heat, and due to that, you remember I mentioned to you, chemical lithium diffusion in the cathode, chemical lithium diffusion in the anode can increase the internal resistance. That is where I'm relating it. So you shouldn't go too low temperature. But interestingly, lithium titanate is shown to be operating at minus 20 degrees centigrade. That is interesting. That is a very, very special character of the lithium titanate technology. But graphite technologies, people normally operate about 10 degrees centigrade. And then high temperature is not a big concern, because we are talking now like, the maximum temperature here is about 35, 37 kind of thing. That's not, in some countries, maybe 45 also. That's not a major concern. Thank you for your question.
I can add something here. So if you look at the capacity fading mechanisms for typically lithium iron phosphate, along with graphite, or also with NMC, NCA, what you observe is at very high temperatures, even within this 50-55 range, the capacity fade, especially because of calendar aging, because of solid electrolyte interface, actually increases. So at very high temperatures, you have capacity fade happening quicker. So your cells age quicker, which means they don't work as well. And at very low temperatures, you have the issue of lithium plating mechanisms coming in as well. So you typically have like a sweet spot somewhere between 25 to 30 degrees, which is good. There's also a saying in the EV world, temperature is not a problem because all our battery packs have thermal management systems. But I don't think that's actually a fair statement, because thermal management only happens when you're either charging or discharging the battery pack. And you're just leaving it outside, just stand still, then the temperature is influenced by the ambient temperature. And then you have places like in Norway where it goes to severe minus temperatures, and you have places where it goes to severe plus temperatures. So you do have a big influence of temperature on the battery pack, and this severely affects calendar and cyclic aging.
Thank you, Prof. Gautham. So we have another question for Prof. Gautham. So from Harita. So with reference to the time versus yield graphs of solar and wind generation in Netherlands, so are the patterns similar in other regions of the world, like specifically for India? And additionally, what other parameters would influence finding a correct or optimal quantum of storage support, for example, for an electricity grid?
Yeah. So of course, the answer to that would be there's big differences between different regions of the world. So for example, in the Netherlands, on an average between summer and winter, if you look at total energy yield, there's about 5 to 6 times difference in the energy that you produce. But the higher you are in the latitude on the planet, there's more seasonal variations. And the closer you are to the equator, the seasonal variation starts reducing. So however, you will still have the day-to-day variations. So what you can do is for your own region, look for a number called equivalent sun hours. You have this data available on the internet for all places in the world, and try to see how this equivalent sun hours changes from January to December. Right. Similarly, you can also look at the average wind speed in your region, how that changes, and the power generated from wind is usually the cubic of the wind speed. So these numbers can quickly give you a feeling of how much seasonal variation that you have. And you can look at some kind of national or regional databases that can give you some idea about the day-to-day differences. But what we do know is there is some seasonal variation, and the higher you are in latitude, these variations become more and more. Right. So, and any kind of complementary renewable generation, like, for example, there is no sun in the night and there's much lower in winter, right? How much will change? So this balance between solar and wind would always be a good solution in any part of the world.
Thank you, Prof. Gautham. So I think Krishna has another question. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Professor, so I had one question. So like, suppose I charge my phone till 100% battery. So the time it takes to drain the battery till suppose 89, 90. The amount of time it takes is huge compared to the time it takes to drop from 40 to 30. So I think the battery is able to take a good amount of percent in when it is charged to the full amount. So how can this correlation be compared to the EVs? So this was my question.
Yeah, so whenever you're charging a cell, we have these two regions. We call it the constant current charging phase and the constant voltage charging phase. And basically you have a voltage cutoff in your charger. And as soon as your cell while charging reaches that voltage, you move to the constant voltage charging, and then that region, your current starts dropping. That's also why typically if you look at after, let's say, 80 to 85% on your phone charging, you'll see that the charging goes very slow. You charge a lot of time, but the energy that goes in becomes less, and that's because the current is much lower in the constant voltage charging region. So with the electric vehicle, we have the same issue, but electric vehicle is a little bit more complicated. That's because to improve the lifetime performance of the vehicles, normally it is already software restricted. So even though on your dashboard, you might actually say 100% charge, you actually are not reaching the 100% limit of the cell in terms of the chemistry, right? So you might actually be at 90%, but your dashboard might actually say you're at 100%, right? So this is ensuring the guarantees for the mileage of the vehicle over long periods of time, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is when you go to a fast charging station with an EV, I'm really talking about 150, 350 kilowatt, you can never fast charge at 100%. It's also because the fast charging only happens the constant current charging phase. So typically as a rule of thumb is that you can only fast charge your EV up to 80 or 90%. And if you actually look at actual measurements from EVs, you start seeing that anywhere between 40 to 50%, most commercial EVs start dropping in power, especially at very high charging power. So which means you can charge a fast charge capable EV at 50 kilowatts all the way up to, let's say, 80, 90%. But at 350 kilowatts, the same EV will actually start dropping its power. So this is a little bit a correlation between the charging current, the charging power, and the charging time. If you go to the website of this company, it's called, I'll put it in the chat box, called FastNet. They have actually measured these charging curves for different commercial EVs. It's actually a company which operates fast charging stations in the Netherlands, and they've actually put it. So you can put FastNet and you can put, I don't know, a BMW i3 or Audi e-tron. I can actually see the charging curves for different kinds of currents and powers and see the behavior of different EVs.
Yes, sir, it answers my question. Thank you to both the professors and all the three clubs for holding this talk. Thank you all.
Thank you, Krishna, and thank you Prof. Gautham for answering the question. So do you have any more other questions?
Hi, Professor Gautham. I'm Sarthak speaking. So I work on lithium-ion battery recycling. So I mostly look at secondary applications for spent batteries, as in sorting mechanisms for making batteries for stationary applications, and elemental and direct recycling routes for handling different type of chemistries. Is it something that is being actively researched in TU Delft? And could you please get me connected to someone who is working in this domain? It would be highly helpful if I could get your insights on this.
Yeah, so the recycling part, we have colleagues in in a different faculty where they look at anode recycling and cathode recycling. So they look at the three methods, pyroelectric methods and direct recycling methods. So if you shoot me an email, then I can connect you with them. The part about analyzing the battery and judging the state of health of used batteries for second life application, that's something that we try to do in our group. We don't yet have an active project, so we normally do this as part of smaller master thesis to kind of be able to analyze cells, to be able to say what is the state of health, and then to be able to go from a diverse pack into kind of categorize them into much older cells and relatively better state of health and much better state of health to kind of to do this categorization.
Yes. Thank you so much, Professor. I'll definitely drop you a mail.
Thank you for all the questions. So it seems like we do not have any more questions. And thank you, speakers, for taking the time to actually speak on energy storage and also all your such an enriching presentation. And also thank you to all the participants for actually attending, taking your time to actually attend our event. So currently right now we will have about 10 minutes coffee break. Yeah. Yeah. So currently we actually have a 10 minutes coffee break. So please be back at your respective timing for the different time zones for the next talk. So for the next topic, we will actually be talking about carbon capture and storage. Yeah. Thank you, Prof. Gautham, for your time. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. Bye.
Bye.